as Zscaler integrate with Okta. So it's actually exciting to see you all. So I see a lot of people joining in and showing interest in today's session. So I just want to start off by saying that one of the core missions of Zscaler is to empower your business to be more secure, simple, and productive. So when I say simple, I mean that simplifying your network infrastructure, reducing your cost, and things like that, right? So now we understand that IT has been the cornerstone transformation. So if we talk about things like mobility, so mobility has actually helped us to be so productive, right? So today, in today's world, we see that users are spread everywhere. Users are sitting in office. People are working from remote offices. People are working from home. So mobility has actually helped us a lot in today's world. At the same point of time, we see that there's a lot of cloud adoption which has been happening these days amongst all the organizations. So we see that a lot of people actually have workloads on multi-cloud environments, right? So when it comes to application development, so there was a time where the applications used to be developed in on-prem environment. Then before you roll out, you have to do some kind of a testing, and then you have to probably launch this application in the cloud, right? So today, with the help of technologies like Kubernetes and Dockers and containers, people are able to develop these applications on the cloud, and they're able to roll out the application. So that's the kind of flexibility and the agility is what the cloud technology brings in, right? And then we have IoT, OT, which is also picking up. So we have a lot of smart devices. We have a lot of smart cars. We have so many things coming in IoT, OT. So Zscaler actually believes in that we collect the telemetrics and leverage some of these telemetrics to actually enhance our services. And I don't even have to talk about AML. So AML has actually taken the main stage today. So we see pretty much AML is actually everywhere in the industry, right? Now, if you talk about digital transformation, so typically the organizations tend to focus on three main aspects. So one, if we talk about the application transformation, so like I said, we see today organizations are all adopting more and more SaaS-based applications, right? So we see that on an average, we see that there are at least 5 to 10 SaaS applications which has been used typically by any organizations on an average, right? Now, at the same point of time, when you talk about network transformation, now due to COVID, we see that applications are moving on cloud, so users are moving remote, so users are sitting in multiple locations, right? So it is also very important that we actually give reachability to these applications for these users, irrespective of wherever they are located. And finally, when we talk about security transformation, so cybersecurity has actually been one of the hot topics today amongst the IT leaders. So almost every organizations they talk about cybersecurity. So you beat IT leaders, you talk about IT managers, you talk about CEOs, CISOs, CTOs, CIOs. And even at times, it has been discussed even at the board level as well. So we have seen a lot of annual reports being published by multiple organizations, and we can see the importance of cybersecurity in those areas. But we see that today, on an annual scale, we see that roughly about $219 billion of money is actually been what has been spent to invest on the security services, security products, and also to implement some of these security services. But unfortunately, we see that a lot of this money is actually being spent on traditional security technologies. So things like firewalls, right? So let's take a scenario. So today, if we talk about any breach which has been happening in any of the organizations, so there has not been a situation where there is no firewall, right? So almost every company has got solutions like firewall, and they have some kind of perimeter devices deployed on their network, right, in order to ensure that their organization is secure. But at the same point of time, we see that breaches also happen, right? So when breaches happen, organizations they want to strengthen their security posture, so they probably end up buying more and more security devices. They probably end up buying more and more firewalls, right? And then and they try to actually build a castle and a moat security kind of a model, right? Now, I just want to take few minutes to help you understand why this architecture is actually not so effective in today's digital transformation journey. So now, probably roughly at late 80s or maybe in early 90s. So that was a time where the industry actually accepted on an IP-based architecture, right? So we had data centers. So data center was the center of the universe. So everything was actually hosted on data centers. Applications were there in data center. Almost everything is running in the data center. So you have applications, and then you have other networking components. You have routers, you have switches. So this was a time where there were good networking companies like Cisco. They actually sold a lot of routers. They sold a lot of switches, which was adopted by multiple organizations. And thanks to these technologies, they were able to extend their network to the branch offices. They were able to extend their network to factories and other remote locations, right? So they probably implemented technologies like IPsec tunnel, MPLS, and things like that. So I have to say this was actually probably at that point of time one of the breakthrough in the field of computing and networking world, because the users can just come into the branch locations. The users can just go into the factories. They can just sit and they can access the applications in the data center, even though when these branch offices are all located maybe hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away, right? That's the kind of reachability what some of these technologies actually brought in. But today we see that with the digital transformation, which has been adopted by many organizations, the users are all going remote. And we have more and more applications which has been deployed on cloud environments. Now, on an average, like I said, we see that companies typically have about at least two cloud environments. They at least have an AWS or an Azure, or maybe an Azure and a GCP, right? Now, typically, when you talk about securing some of these data centers, like I said, they probably end up deploying some kind of security stack like firewalls and things like that, right? Now, when you transition some of these workloads, some of these applications to these cloud environments, now you have to bring in some kind of security. Now, this is where probably all organizations typically think about implementing virtual firewalls on the cloud environment. So, like you see in this diagram, you can see that there are some kind of VMs which has been deployed on these multi-cloud environments, right? So these are typically firewalls. Probably it can actually give you some kind of security. But we need to understand that when we talk about deploying some of these security devices, all of these security devices, they run on layer 3 IP addresses, right? And the moment you have an IP address, you're actually exposing your attack surface. Now, what if you could actually minimize these attack surface? Now, if you talk about any public IP address, these public IP addresses can be discovered or they can be attacked by the attackers. So that's the first step. So I just want to walk you through the four step of breaches which happens. So the first thing is the attackers, they typically try to find you. Now, thanks to these IP addresses, which has been configured on some of these perimeter devices. And then once they discover these perimeter devices, they try to compromise you, right? So this is where we actually see attacks happening like DDoS. We see other kind of targeted attacks, which has been targeted towards some of these perimeter stack devices. So we see all kind of devices, all kind of attacks which has been targeted on these various environments, right? Now, once your network gets compromised, now this is where now let's take a scenario that there is a particular system within your infrastructure, right? And then that system gets compromised. Now, because we have connectivity from various locations, from your cloud, from your branch offices to the data centers, there is always a possibility that the infected machine or the compromised machine can actually move laterally amongst the entire network. Now, this means that your other devices, your applications, your servers, which were actually secured with the help of those traditional security devices, they're also under the risk because you have an infected network within an infra, and then this infected source can actually move laterally, and they can start targeting towards some of your sensitive resources or some of your crown jewels, right? So they move laterally, and then finally, what happens? Then they steal your data. They exfiltrate your data, right? So these are typically the four stages what we see when we talk about a traditional a firewall or VPN-based architecture. So this is what exactly where we want to focus on. So we're not going to be focusing on putting on this box, that box. We're not going to be doing that. Our main focus is to actually cover these challenges and help in providing a solution so that we can try to minimize the attack surface. That's the core focus of Zscaler. And how exactly are we doing that? So this is where we are going to be leveraging the zero trust architecture. Now, just before I run through this particular slide, just a quick review on zero trust. So when we talk about zero trust, your applications are merely destinations, and then your users are all untrusted, right? So I don't trust any of the users, right? and then there is no routable network between these two, between the source and the destination, right? So this is where we exactly focus on. But unfortunately, we see that a lot of traditional firewall vendors, they have been adopting the term zero trust. Also call themselves as zero trust. Probably in my subsequent slide, I will actually help you differentiate in terms of the architecture on why, what exactly is a true zero trust architecture compared to the traditional firewall-based architecture, which we just spoke some time back. Now, down below, we have the users. So these could be pretty much any system. It could be the users accessing the applications from your laptops. It could be the IoT OT devices, or it could be even your applications, right? Now, what we first do is we actually we terminate the connection onto the Zscaler's zero trust exchange. Now, this is where we stop the connection. We identify who you are. Now, this is where we actually leverage help from vendors like Okta, where we integrate our stack, our security portfolio, our security components with Okta, so that we get the complete information of the user database and the groups and the security details and so on. So we need to understand, we need to authenticate who are these users, right? That's why we authenticate those connections. And once these connections are authenticated, then we actually need to see where are you going, right? So I know who you are, but I need to know where you're going. So I need to know which application you're connecting to, whether you're connecting to application A, whether you're connecting to the application B, application C. Now, this is the place where we enforce the policies, where we need to distinguish between the users, and we start building the policies based on which applications these users are allowed to access, right? But naturally, as you know, thanks to attacks like social engineering, identity can always be stolen, right? Now, this is where we have to be more careful. We have to understand the risk. And then now, thanks to some of our technologies, we actually need to implement some kind of context-based policies. Now, I need to understand and enforce or allow access to these destinations by validating some of these things. Now, let me help you understand what are these. Now, if we talk about UEBA, now let's take a scenario. You have a user. The user is sitting in India, so he's accessing a specific application. He's been trying to access a specific destination. But then all of a sudden, the next 5 minutes, we see the same user is trying to connect from a country like Japan or maybe from US, right? So there is something abnormal about this kind of access, right? Because it's humanly impossible for the user to actually transition from one country to another country in a matter of 5 minutes. So we actually understand into those aspects, and obviously we need to understand the device posture as well. Whether the user is coming from a managed asset, whether the user is coming from an unmanaged access, or whether it's a BYOD devices, we need to understand and implement some kind of posture-based controls as well. Now, now, in any organization, almost 90 to 95% of the traffic is actually encrypted. So today, it's very hard to find any destination which is running on plain text. Almost every destination or every application which is there on internet is all running on HTTPS. So it's very important that we need to perform 100% SSL decryption, and then we enforce the security policies. And then thanks to solution providers like Okta, we can also leverage some of their security intel, and then we can start enforcing these policies. So once we validate who you are, where you're connecting to, and then once we look at some of the other contextual based policies, then we decide whether we want to terminate the connection, whether we need to provide the access, or whether we need to block that specific connection, or whether we need to isolate that particular connection, right? So now here I talk about two kind of destinations. So one is the internet, and then we have the SaaS-based applications. So this is predominantly the users who are sitting trying to access the applications which are hosted outside their corporate network, right? So it could be applications like GitHub, it could be Salesforce, it could be YouTube, it could be Gmail, and things like that. Now, on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have applications which are typically being hosted in your data center, right? Now, these are in-house applications. Now, this is where we leverage a component called as a connector, so that we try to completely mask your entire application itself from the outside world. And then there is a inside out connection which gets established to the zero trust exchange architecture. So this way we can actually ensure that the users not just connect to the entire network. Mainly today, it's all about accessing the applications, be it internet-based applications or maybe be it private-based applications. And this is how we can actually eliminate some of the lateral threat movement, right? But maybe you can always say, hey, Abhishek, you know what, this is what some of the firewall vendors, they also come and say, right? So because I've been talking to so many firewall vendors, and this is exactly what they say. Now, this is where we need to understand the core difference between a zero trust architecture and a firewall and a VPN based architecture. Now, if you look into the diagram on the left hand side, so here we terminate the connections. The Zscaler zero trust exchange is something like a switchboard, right? So I need to understand, it's all about accessing the applications, right? So I need to understand which application do you want to access. Now, basis on whatever policies which I was talking on my previous slide, then I decide whether I need to give access to this application or whether I need to give access to any kind of destination. And then you have the firewall, whereas in the case of the firewall, it's mainly like a pass-through architecture, which means that I actually give access to the entire network, right? So once I give access to the entire network, then you're pretty much in. You can actually pretty much access any of the resources. So this is one of the core differentiator between the zero trust architecture and the firewall and the VPN-based architecture. Now, just quickly moving on. So I just want to talk about three main technologies for the Zscaler for users. Now, there are three technologies where we want to focus on. One is the Zscaler Internet Access. So this is where we focus on enforcing policies to give access to the internet-based applications or the SaaS-based applications. And then we have the Zscaler Private Access. So the Zscaler Private Access is predominantly focused towards giving access to your private applications, your in-house applications, which is hosted in your data center. And then we have one more component called as the ZDX, which is the digital experience solution. So wherein we can actually help you understand where exactly the problem arises when the user is trying to access an application. So we give complete end-to-end visibility for in terms of from the user side till the destination side. We give complete end-to-end visibility. So now, if you have all of these three solutions in place, you can see probably in the right-hand side. I'm not going to go through each of these use cases. You can see by yourself. There are multiple use cases which we can address with these technologies there in place. Uh, so now what we can also see on the right hand side is that with these technologies in place, we can actually help eliminate a lot of inbound devices, inbound DMZ devices, outbound devices. We can probably look at eliminating some of these components. So this is what I mean by in my first slide, I talk about simplifying the architecture. So this is exactly what I mean to say, because the moment you have these multiple security stacks in your network, it's all about maintenance, patch upgrades, downtime, high availability, and things like that, right? So this is exactly where the Zscaler for users portfolio typically comes into picture. And then we actually have, when I talk about the ZIA or the ZPA solution, we focus on four key areas. One is the cyber threat protection. So the cyber threat protection, this is where we focus on technologies like providing access to specific applications, be it URL-based categories, be it cloud-based applications. We can also enforce policies based on ATPs, anti-malware, anti-spyware, things like that, right? Anti-phishing and bot protection. Now, data protection has been the key. Today, it's all about the data, so you have to secure your data. Now, we have a complete security stack when we talk about data protection. We have a complete inline DLP solution. We have an out-of-band CASB solution, which can integrate where we can integrate with your cloud apps. And then there's something new which we have launched just about a month back, which is called the Zscaler 360, where we give complete business insights into what exactly is been happening in a network. What is your organization's risk score? What is a risk score amongst the four stages of breach, which I spoke about some time back, right? And then it's a zero trust connectivity. So we always believe in connecting to the apps, not to the networks. So just a quick peek on our data center footprint. So we have globally about 150 plus data centers. We have so China has always been a challenge. So thanks to some of our customers, we have deployed. We have good references, and we have seen how exactly we can tackle some of the challenges in those geographies. So I also want to just take a couple of minutes. I just want to talk about some of our platform offerings, where we talk about four key things. So one is Zscaler for users. I already spoke about ZIA, ZPA, and ZDX. And we also need to look at SaaS security, posture management, and things like CASB and so on. Now, it's not always about the users. You also have workloads. You also need to secure your workloads. So we have two solutions over there. We have the ZIA for workloads, and then we have the ZPA for workloads. So things like workload connecting to internet. So how can I secure my workloads? Now, workloads talking to workloads, one workload and one cloud talking to the other workload and the other cloud, right? So how exactly can I enforce zero trust on these communication as well? And then we have IoT OT as well. So how exactly can I secure IoT OT traffic? And then we have the B2B connectivity as well. So, right. So, business talking to business. So things like M&A and those kind of use cases typically come into picture. So we have a complete platform offering when you talk about our solution stack. Uh, Lastly, I just want to take a few minutes before I hand it over to Karun from Okta. So this particular slide talks about our core integration with the Okta platform. So one is we need to authenticate the users. So the way how we do that is by doing a SAML integration, right? So we do a SAML integration. We get complete information about the user database, complete information about the group information. The entire security DL gets passed on to the Zscaler stack, and then we can start enforcing policies based on the users, based on the groups, and based on other criteria as well. And then what about BYOD devices? So we're talking about managed devices, but what if the user is coming in from an unmanaged asset? What if the user is coming in from a BYOD device, right? So this is where we leverage a technology called as identity proxy integration. So if you just go to Google and search for identity proxy integration, you can actually find a tons of information about what exactly this technology means. But on a nutshell, this means that when the user is trying to access the application, the corporate application from your own BYOD asset, we can leverage Okta and we can authenticate those users so that you can actually see what exact activity is being performed by these users. And then thanks to SCIM, so now SCIM is where we can actually dynamically get updates based on the users, based on the groups. Now let's take a scenario. So now when there is a user who's quitting the company, now it is highly impossible for me to go and manage on Zscaler platform, right? So things gets managed everything on the Okta side. Now this is where once you add a user or once you delete a user, all of these policies, all of these things, all of the database gets seamlessly synchronized to our platform, right? And then we also have something called as the identity threat protection. So where we can actually see the behavior of the user, and then we can pass on the behavior of the user statistics to the Okta platform, and then they can start enforcing some of the policies. With that, I'll take a pause. Maybe we can reconvene maybe in the last 10-15 minutes where we can take some Q&As. With now, I will hand it over to Karun from Okta, so he'll talk about the Okta technology. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Abhishek. Thank you. So let me share my screen. Share screen. Okay, so that was an excellent session from Abhishek. So I just wanted to kind of rally back on what Abhishek mentioned. So here, what we are looking at is more, from my perspective, I'll be touching upon how we look at it from an identity point of view and how the whole zero trust architecture pans out from keeping identity at the center, right? Now, just before going in there, just wanted to kind of quickly introduce Okta. So we are a fairly young company, 2009 founded, based out of San Fran, and we have a public listed company. So we are listed in NASDAQ, and we have around 6,000 employees, out of which 3,000 employees focus on research and development on identity solutions, right? And what we also are very proud of is our customer base, which is around 8,000 plus. And with global offices across the globe, including in India, where we have around, I think, 80 to 100 employees as of today. We are heavily invested on across the globe, kind of growth strategy, right? And one of the interesting points about Okta is also that Okta created identity as a service Magic Quadrant back then. And then now it's merged into access management Magic Quadrant. And you can see that we've been consistently there in Leaders Quadrant for 8 times, right? 2 times as identity as a service. And then once they discontinued and merged it into access management quadrant, we are there as leaders in Magic Quadrant of access management. Now, just to set some context, so I think we did cover what are the core tenets of zero trust, right? But this is CISA's or NIST view of what is the real pillars of a zero trust architecture, right? And identity is one of them. Then we have to look at the device, how networks are being accessed, and what are the different application workloads and data, right? And the core tenets of a zero trust initiative is really never trust, always verify. principles of least privilege and continuous authentication, right? So that's kind of the space which affects identity the most, if you think about it, because verification is to do with identity, where privileges are assigned using identities, and authentication processes are done in identity. And especially when we look at it from today's challenge, so what we see today is there were days where application bad actors would try to get into applications using vulnerabilities, open code, and things like that to get into infrastructure and kind of carry out attacks. But what we see predominantly is that nowadays users are actually logging in, right? So the bad actors are not using strategies which are tied to network level access control breaches or things like that, but they're actually using valid credentials and performing things like MFA bypass or credential stuffing attacks, and breach password database captures, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of the premise on why identity has become a very big aspect of a zero trust initiative and architecture, mainly because everything starts with a user authenticating and coming through a particular device and accessing different resources. And bad actors have become more and more sophisticated in terms of accessing or getting access to credentials which are legitimate credentials, right? So if you think about the attacks that have just, if you look at 2 months of all the attacks that's going on, it's really about social engineering attacks, MFA fatigue attacks, and so on and so forth, which basically makes users to give away credentials, right? So with that, what that means is that you need a layer which can be called as a central access plane or central control plane from a zero trust standpoint, and that typically is an identity layer, right? So that's where an identity layer can kind of detect who the user is, coming from which device, and then look at risks pertaining to the context. So the context can be things like geolocation, behavioral patterns, or network segmentations, and things like that, right? So making use of those contexts to assess risk, and then apply policies and use the engine to provide access to resources, right? So that kind of goes into the tenets of never trust, always verify, and as well as continuous authentication in a way, right? What is also important is how we feed in these data into your SIEM solutions, source solutions, and get that data to be used for forensics as well as for improvement of policy constructs, right? So there is a continuous policy kind of improvement which needs to be done. So that's kind of where Okta fits in. And the way we see it, so this is our view of a zero trust architecture, right? Where we look at identity starting with a user interaction, where a user is coming with a device and accessing certain resources, right? Now that's where context becomes very important. And as an identity provider, we ourselves can kind of figure out who's the user. Is he from this department? Because we have HRMS integrations. So we can say, is he from IT department trying to do this? Is he a HR administrator trying to access, let's say, an HRMS system? Is there a new device which is coming in line? What's the location of the user? Is there a geo velocity which you can't predict, and this like an impossible time travel scenario, and so on and so forth, right? So we have our own set of signals which we can leverage because we are a cloud facing service. But at the same time, what's more important from a zero trust architecture is the ability to connect your rest of your security ecosystem and gain that insight, right? So that's where things like user integration or email security integration, where with example Proofpoint helps, right? Where you can actually look at somebody who's accessed the malicious email and clear off his sessions in Okta and make sure he's actually resetting his credential, for example. Or we may be looking at a developer trying to access an AWS admin console, and at that time you may want to check whether it's a corporate device, but also look at what's the device posture. So we integrate with products like CrowdStrike, for example, or VMware, and so on and so forth, right? Where we can actually gain the insight of what's the device's posture like, right? Before giving access to critical resources like AWS admin console or AWS CLI. The same way we can integrate with other aspects, right? Like what network zones, what applications they're coming from, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of the context that we can use, not just our context, but we can kind of pick those contexts from third-party systems and then use it to assess the scenarios. So basically, we can look at what is the risk score coming out of it, out of the combination of all those behavioral and user plus device kind of posture checks. And then we can assign the right kind of authentication strategy, which means that when it's deemed slightly suspicious, we can use that authentication strategy to
Did we lose Karan? Oh yeah, he's lost. Wait, let me check with him, guys. Yeah, Karan, you're back now.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I think
Yeah, yeah.
something went wrong.
Cool.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see it now. Let's
Okay.
continue.
Yeah. So ability to apply the right authentication strategy for accessing the resources becomes critical. And then when we look at how we then look at kind of improving the access or providing a seamless access to your be it your infrastructure, be it your apps, be it your APIs, and so on and so forth. That's where the power of protocols comes in, right? So we support a range of protocols which help you to kind of bridge those applications using our components, as well as with protocols like OpenID Connect, SAML, WSFed, etc. Right. So that's kind of how we look at providing that zero trust architecture framework. And then obviously one major part of it is also how do we feed that back into your orchestration platforms, your onboarding platforms, your security analytics platforms like source systems, and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of a high level gist of how we look at zero trust. And that's where uh, pre-built integrations and tech ecosystem integration helps, right? So if you look at it, Okta kind of maintains 7,500, almost close to 7,500 integrations for different platforms for integration, for security reasons, for protocol reasons like provisioning, deprovisioning, for access reasons like authentication and multi-factor, and so on and so forth, right? So it's basically a place where we actually connect and become that glue to kind of connect all of this together and then present that as a unified security posture for your environment, right? So that's kind of a high level view of how we see it from an architecture standpoint. Now, today we are kind of focusing on how we kind of leverage some of the best of breed integrations in the market, right? So that's where Zscaler and Okta, we really work together. We have great teams working together, putting great product integrations in place. Both have been in leaders quadrant for quite a while, so we are both established in the market from a leadership standpoint. We have huge customer bases which we deal with, a lot of common customers as well, right? So like what Abhishek mentioned, I'm just going to kind of re-zoom in into the aspects which Abhishek mentioned, and then take a look at what that means, right? So essentially, we could send signals for determining whether it's a trusted or untrusted device. Essentially, whether
Hey,
it's a cop.
Karan, sorry to interrupt you. You're breaking in between. If you can just turn off your camera, I think that will save some bandwidth.
Sure.
Thank you.
Let me just. Uh, is that okay? Can
Yeah,
you
that's
hear
fine.
me
Let's
okay? Yeah.
continue. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So where we come from is, first of all, when we authenticate users, we are not just looking at sending that user authentication result to Zscaler. We are sending result about whether the network device, the device is basically a trusted device, which is corporate managed, or it's an unmanaged device, right? And then if it is an unmanaged device, what is the kind of assurances that we've taken to make sure that the device is at a minimum level okay to be connected to your networks or to your applications, right? So that's where a device assurance policy comes into picture. Then you can segment your access patterns to different zones, different applications, using what we call as a provisioning, where Okta can now push group memberships and user information into Zscaler, and Zscaler can then use that to kind of provide policies on what zones, what policies to be applied from a ZPA or ZIA standpoint, right? And then the last part is really about exchanging signals between the trust exchange and Okta, right? So that's the other key piece which comes into picture. Now, what happens with this integration is that you actually get to deploy it faster, because it's all based on cloud, and it increases your agility in terms of moving towards an agile way of implementing security. Secondly, it greatly improves user experience, because user experience is when every time they're asked to be logged on, we can use this context to also give frictionless user experiences to the user, right? And the third is, obviously, we are bringing all of this into a single identity control plane together with the inside out access, which is ZPA, and inside out, which is basically ZIA, and outside in, which is ZPA, right? So we are kind of covering the attack surfaces from both that perspective, right? So that's kind of the overall benefit of looking at how we integrate together. Now, I also wanted to quickly give a sneak peek on what else identity does, right? First of all, phishing resistance. When users get authenticated, that's when they get spoofed into malicious websites, asked to compromise credentials, and so on and so forth. So we have phishing resistant factors which make sure that there's no man in the middle or adversary in the middle attack, right? So that's done because we have a component called Okta FastPass, which sits in the laptop, enables URLs to be checked against bad actor URLs, right? So that's kind of how you can kind of make your environment phishing resistant. We can enforce higher level assurances like FIDO, WebAuth, and biometrics, and so on and so forth, right, based on phishing resistance. The other aspect is we have device assurance policy to say what should be the minimum OS version of a non or unmanaged device, what should be the security posture of the device, the disk needs to be encrypted, or is it enabled with a biometric, and so on and so forth, right? So you can actually check some of the basic device assurances without having to enforce users or force users to enroll into MDMs or any of that, right? So that kind of gives you a way to still extend to your extended workforce, your third-party vendors, and so on and so forth, where they can come in with minimum device assurance and then interact with your organization. Now, one aspect also is during login, you normally see that there are bad actors pounding on login login pages, right? So that's what we kind of make sure we prevent, because we have this pre-auth check, which is called Okta Threat Insights, which basically looks at a global list of blacklisted IPs, which we maintain because we have 18,000 customers with us. So we basically maintain a list and we triage it as well as run AIML models behind it to actually find out whether these are suspicious bad actor IPs which are coming in, right? And then also providing adaptive authentication capabilities, adaptive policy capabilities, where you can do things like a top up with a higher assurance factor for authentication, and so on and so forth. The next aspect is also about, once the user is authenticated, if there is an adverse event which happens, do you want to clear all the sessions of the user or force the user to reset a password? So those are the post authentication life cycle activities which we can support, right? So that's kind of augmenting your zero trust strategy to kind of fill all the gaps which happens in case an adversary comes in and kind of gets into an application, right? So that's our view of how we conduct security from an identity standpoint. Now, one key aspect also is, how do you allow users to authenticate to the very first touch point they have, right? That's the device. So that's where we have released desktop MFA and desktop password sync for Mac OS, where we can actually integrate and provide additional factor authentication for your devices, right? And now we are on limited early access as of today, and we have already got some customers onboarded in it. this would be expected to be fully available by end of this year, basically. So that's kind of the direction where we are going, so that we can be assured that device level authentication is implemented, and then from there you can actually carry on your authenticated journey into your different resources, and while still continuously being assessed for security risks, right? That's kind of what I call Okta in a nutshell, and kind of give you that idea of where all we play from a use case standpoint. Now, what we have in our Okta website, we would probably share this post our session also, is that we have a zero trust assessment tool, which mostly looks at it from an identity standpoint. But again, it gives you a fair idea of where your organization is and what are the possible or potential strategies that you can apply, so that you can actually go to the next levels of your identity journey, right, or zero trust journey. So that's a very valid tool, which a lot of our customers love it, because they can actually run through it, understand the identity gaps which they need to fulfill before getting into a zero trust architecture, and then move on from there to the next kind of maturity level, right? And what we see is the majority of organizations are really at stage 0, stage 1 kind of position, but it really depends on organizations to organizations, right? So this is something that you can all try and kind of get yourself kind of assessed from an organization standpoint, and see where you see the deltas are, right, basically. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Vikas. Thanks for the time, for giving us time to present together.
Great. Thank you, Karun and Abhishek. Wonderful session. Guys, 10:11:46, so we have time for Q&A. Please raise your hand, guys, if you want to ask any question. I will unmute you and then you can ask your question. Okay, Mr. Arun, I'm going to unmute you now. Allow mic. Yeah, Mr. Arun, go ahead and ask your question. Mr. Arun, you can unmute yourself now. If not, we are going to Sunil. So Sunil, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Go
this is
ahead,
Arun
please.
here. Yeah, first of all, thanks for organizing this excellent session. Both the sessions were very, very good. So I have one question that I think on the identity access management, right? Often, right? I think a lot of us find it difficult, right, about the PAM and PIM functionality, right? So does it, right, Okta, along with the identity access management, include the PAM functionality as well? Or right, you guys see this totally at two different right aspects? So that's the only question I have.
Yep. Thanks, Arun, for that question. In fact, so the way we look at it is we have three pillars, to be honest, from a platform standpoint. One is what we call as access management, which is all about authenticating to applications, multi-factor strategy, so on and so forth. Then we have the governance layer, which is around lifecycle automation, certification processes, review processes, and so on and so forth. And then the third pillar that we have is privileged access, where we currently cater to AWS or any server access, right, where SSH RDP is required and you want to eliminate static passwords or even vaulting and rotation of passwords. We're trying to eliminate the whole spectrum of passwords in that space for SSH RDP. So we do have what we call as advanced server access as of today, and we are releasing privileged access management very soon, right? So that's in our roadmap, and it's slated to come out early Jan, basically. So we are actually entering that space, and we are kind of moving into all those adjacent areas because it makes sense to have a unified kind of view, and that's where we are headed to.
Thank you so much. I think you have answered my question, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Anna.
Great. Just one more question, because only Sunil has raised hand. So Sunil, over to you.
Thanks, Karun, and thanks, Abhishek. I only have one question. So this is regarding desktop MFA. So will it support Linux machines also, or it is only limited to Windows?
As of today, we are focusing on the most laptops to be covered. So basically, we are initially rolling out with Windows and Linux. sorry, Mac OS, but then we will be actually looking at it at a future stage to include Ubuntu or Red Hat flavors into it. But today it's really focusing on Windows and Mac OS.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
just a point over here, since we're talking about the compatibility of the operating systems. So when you talk about securing some of your assets, which is on the Linux operating system, maybe it could be Ubuntu or anything of like, let's say something like Linux Mint operating system, right? Now, Zscaler supports agents for all the three major operating systems. We have support for Windows, we have support for Mac OS, and also for the Linux platform. So if you're talking about securing some of these platforms, now Zscaler, we can actually integrate with Okta. We can do the complete authentication. We can do SAML authentication. We can enforce things like multi-factor authentication. We can do script provisioning and things like that, right? Now with the agents installed on these Linux operating systems, we can actually authenticate these users, and then we can enforce security as well, because all the traffic gets forwarded towards our cloud environment, right? So that's the other thing which I thought I'll just pitch in.
Thanks, Abhishek. Understood. Yeah.
Perfect. I think we can have a couple of more questions. I was feeling very relaxed that I won't have to rush the closing today, because every time we get to 10:59 and I have to rush the closing. But again, questions are better than me closing the session. So Akhilesh, over to you. Akhilesh, you can unmute yourself and ask your question now. Okay, moving to Faisal. Faisal, you can ask your question.
Thanks, Vikas. Thanks, Karun and Abhishek. So Karun, I have a question for you regarding the device trust using Okta FastPass. So two quick questions. One, from a device trust perspective, do you also ingest the certification process in terms of, let's say, a device certificate enrolled from, let's say, a Zscaler or any other MDM partner? That's one. Second, in terms of MFA using the FastPass, do we also get a capability of doing MFA factor chaining? For example, administrators can have two MFA factors with password and multiple things, and maybe normal users can have only one factor.
Yeah, thanks, Faisal. That's a great question. So the first part of the question is around how do we integrate from a device trust standpoint, right? So basically, what we have provided in our platform is a certificate authority, which is fronted with a secure certificate enrollment protocol, and any entity, be it MDM or an EDR or other systems which support plugging in a certificate authority using a CEP protocol, they can now mint a device trust certificate as part of the MDM enrollment and then deploy it into the device, right? And that's what Okta FastPass then verifies. Now, customers can bring their own certificate authority also. So they're not really forced to use Okta CA alone. But typically, the way it works is normally you could just plug in your MDM with the SCP URLs of Okta, and then what happens is when the device gets enrolled using, let's say, for example, a Jamf for Mac OS or Intune for Windows, any of those MDMs, right? They would basically mint an Okta profile certificate for the device, which is associated with the Okta user, right? And that's what we use to determine whether this is a managed device, whether this is an unmanaged device, essentially. So that's kind of how it works. We could still pause evaluating certain devices because we have a way to pause the Okta Verify FastPass itself on our side. But normally it's an MDM thing where they basically go and clear off that certificate. So that's the first part, right? The second part is, as of today, the way we look at it is we are looking at factors as from a level of assurance standpoint. So we are kind of moving more to be aligned with NIST framework. So that's where we are looking at, if there is a single factor which basically proves possession as well as biometrics, we may be actually just triggering one factor. But if there are two factors which prove possession and biometric, then we can actually chain it, right? Because then both factors could be required when somebody is authenticating in. If a factor seems to have fulfilled both, then we would probably trigger it only once, right? Basically. So that's kind of the approach we are looking at, more from an assurance level rather than the number of factors. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Sounds good. Let's move to the next question. Somesh, you are up.
Hello. Thank you very much, Vikas, Abhishek, and Karun. It was really a nice session. So my question to Abhishek, and it's not a big question. You talked about the workload to workload production. Let's say I have a
Yeah,
distributed architecture, right? Where I have all
yeah.
three clouds and my loads are distributed. My architecture is something like central VPC and all these things. So by having Zscaler zero trust network solutions, do still I need to have that central VPC, or how can I like save my cost in terms of workload to workload communication, managing
Okay.
all the AD servers, everything like that's what my problem is.
Okay. Now, first, let me try to address on the security side of things. Now, let's take a scenario. You have workloads on AWS, you have workloads on Azure, you have workloads on multiple VPCs, right? Now, typically, our architecture is going to look something like this. So now most of the organizations they might have a hub and spoke model, right? So you have workloads running on one VPC, you might have probably workloads running on another VPC, and then you have a centralized VPC, which typically acts as the gateway, right? And then the other side, you may probably have a similar architecture. Now, what we do is like now, naturally, it's not possible for us to go and install agents on some of these workloads. So this is where we leverage a component called as Cloud Connector. So it's a lightweight VM which actually gets installed on your hub VPC. Okay, so basically the workloads which is running on the spoke VPCs will be pointed towards the hub VPC as a default gateway, so that the traffic for all of these workloads gets routed towards the cloud connector, and from the cloud connector it actually goes to the zero trust platform. Now that's one thing about the internet access. Now the second thing is, if I talk about accessing from workloads to workloads, now on the other end, now again we need to leverage zero trust, right? So now what we do is like we leverage one more component called as the app connector. So the app connector is again a lightweight VM which actually gets installed in front of these applications, so that we don't directly expose your applications to the internet, right? Now the app connector actually acts as a gateway for your workloads. So now there is a inside out connections which gets established from the app connector towards the Zscaler cloud. So so basically, there is no direct communication which is happening between the workloads on one platform to the workloads on another platform. So basically,
Sorry,
two of these
Abhishek, in the
connections.
interest of time, I'll just one like add on this. But if I have a Kubernetes on the SaaS-based Kubernetes, so how can I install the agents and will it still be working if my workload like 40-50% on the Kubernetes in the same scenario?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's where we there is another. I mean, there are multiple components of Zscaler. So we actually leverage technologies like branch connector. You can just DM me on LinkedIn. I can reach out to you, and then we can discuss more in details. So we deploy a component called as branch connector on the Kubernetes platform, and then we can establish connectivity to zero trust. So Somesh, you can probably ping me on LinkedIn, and then we can connect, and then I can share you more details on that in the interest of time.
Perfect.
Sure,
Sounds good.
Abhishek. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that, guys. Let's take one last question. Mr. Ramesh, over to you. Mr. Ramesh, yeah,
Hello.
go ahead, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask question. Like, what all the challenges do we face even after having this zero trust model?
Okay, so that's a question to to both of us, I believe. Okay, we have often seen some of our users asking these questions. So it's pretty interesting. What are the challenges we see? So by implementing zero trust, we actually try to address some of the challenges which are there. But yeah, there could be scenarios where probably there is a user who's probably connecting from a location where we don't have the nearest cloud, and then there could be performance issues like latency, which may probably come in. But that is something which we're trying to address in the space, because today we have actually also launched data centers in some of the very remote locations, some of the LATAM countries as well, right? So that's one thing which I could think of. But otherwise, I don't see, from a security perspective, I don't see any of our customers who's been adopting our technology coming back to and saying that, hey, there is a problem, right? Uh, that's one thing which I could think of. Otherwise, I don't think from a security perspective, we try to cover as much as possible So that is where we leverage vendors like Okta. We also integrate with Okta. We actually share some of our risk-based users. We can actually leverage some of their identity threat management technology, and then we try to address. So that's the thing.
Yeah, I think maybe from my point of view, right? I think the problem normally lies in establishing the framework when especially when organizations are very agile in terms of mergers and acquisitions, because they basically inherit a lot of tech from different companies, and then that needs to be now looked at from a zero trust architecture standpoint and kind of reevaluated from a tech choice selection standpoint sometimes. That's something we see typically is a problem, because some portions of your organizations gets omitted because of legacy technology inhibiting that part of the organization, right? Because especially in a M&A scenario, we see that a lot, and that's where we normally try to make this framework kind of like a, even from an M&A checklist standpoint, we kind of have this as part of the zero trust due diligence when it comes to doing the tech eval of a company acquisition, basically. So there are like process and kind of organizational kind of constraints which can kind of hinder into proper implementation. But from a technology point of view, I think this is the best bet we have got at this stage.
Okay, sounds good, and really appreciate the
Thank you.
questions coming in. And it's already 12 o'clock, guys. So again, I'll have to rush the closing as always. Thank you, Karan and Abhishek. It was very informative session. The recording will go on Elite CISO's YouTube channel and website. So you can later on, if somebody wants to replay, you can do that. And talking about the certificate, guys, if you want to get your participation certificate, which is a verifiable blockchain-based certificate, what you can do is you can go to Elite CISO's website, click on events, click on upcoming events, come over here and click on CP certificate link. It's 100 rupees that agency charges for this certificate. So you can go ahead, fill this information, pay 118 rupees, and within 24 hours, your certificate will be delivered over email. Now, if you're here on the website to get your certificate, and if we are based out of Bangalore, we are coming up with a in-person physical summit in Bangalore on, sorry guys, on 20th October. It's a full day summit. The morning slot is for CIO CISOs team members, and post lunch session is for corporate CIO and CISOs. So if you want to participate in this, you can simply go ahead and register for the summit. This will have about 250 CIO CISOs joining in. Looking at the registrations we have got, the Delhi one had 300 participants. So I'm so looking forward for this summit. So go ahead and register for this, guys. And last but not the least is the Wheel of Fortune that we are waiting for. So as I said, we will keep spinning till we find the winner. I have got enough watches at my home. I do not want to keep any more. So I'll spin it till we find winner. I mean, if you want to drop off, you can drop off because it's already 12:02. But we have an Apple AirPod draw also coming up after this. So good luck, guys. I'm going to spin it. If your name comes, then go to the chat and say yes. Okay. And Manish, please track the chat and let me know if somebody says yes. So let's see the first one now. The first one goes to Mr. Vijay from Bangalore chapter. Mr. Vijay, I'm sure you are there in the session. Please go to the chat and say yes, you are in the session. I'm spinning for the second one. We have 3 watches as giveaway. So second one is to Austin from Mumbai chapter. And this is the third one now. And the third one goes to Mr. Narsimha Rao from Hyderabad chapter. Very nice. So 3 winners from 3 different cities and 3 different chapters. I'm looking at the chat now. So let me find Manish and unmute him so that he can confirm who is there. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Manish. I'm unmuting him. You now. Yeah, Manish. So who did you find? Who said yes?
So
Austin.
because Austin,
Yeah.
Austin is there, Vijay Gurumurthy is there.
So 2 are gone, right? So I still have to spin for the third
Yeah.
one. Okay.
Yes.
I'm spinning for the third one now. Okay, Miss Advocate Hemant Chavan. There's no yes coming. Okay, I'm spinning it again. 12:04. Guys, be there. Mr. Nantaram from Bangalore chapter. No, still no yes coming. What should I do, guys? Should I keep spinning? Okay, I'll spin one more time. Let's see. Okay, I'm spinning. Mr. Sanjay. Mr. Sanjay. No, he's still not there. Okay, I'm spinning it again. Mr. Manoj Rao. I'm spinning it again. Let's see.
No one yet.
Mr. Abhay from Mumbai chapter. Abhay Bapna. Did I say no? There's still
No,
nobody saying
not
yes.
yet.
Okay, I'm again spinning. Guys, you can drop off. Please feel free. So, Mr. Subhash Singh from Deepak Fertilizer. Mr. Subhash based out of Pune chapter. No, still no. Come on. If somebody can solve this puzzle for me, because I have no option to find out who is attending. So we cannot have the attendee data for the Wheel of Fortune. We can only have the registration data. So if somebody can solve this challenge on Microsoft Teams, we'll have a nice giveaway for you guys. Okay, Mr. Rajendra Boda. I'm spinning it again. Thanks, Tejveer. Okay, so Mr. Murugan.
No one yet.
Okay, guys, I'm spinning for the last time now. Okay, then we will spin for the Apple AirPods. Mr. Hassan Ali. Okay, that's, I think, enough because it's already 12:06. I'm going to remove all these names and I'm going to put the name for the LinkedIn one. Just give me one sec, guys. And this is only for members. So
because we have Murugan here, so I think Murugan
is here, right? Perfect. Awesome. Congratulations. So all three are gone. I'm really happy that it is worth spinning. The names what you see right now is only for the members, Elite CISO members, and when they reposted the LinkedIn post for this webinar. So those names are here. Last week, Mr. Aldrin's name had come for the Apple AirPod, but Mr. Aldrin is not Elite CISO member. So we are trying to address it. How do we take care of that? Okay. But again, as I always mention, the Apple AirPod is only for Elite CISO members. So, okay, guys, I'm spinning it for the Apple AirPod now. Let's see. And going to Mumbai, no. Jagdishwaran from Chennai chapter. Mr. Jagdishwaran, you have to be very quick. Go to the chat and say, yes, you are there. Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, he's there.
Do you see unknown user or do you see the name Manish?
I see unknown user, so he says, yes, I'm here. Not sure.
How do we know then, right? Is there a way for me? Let me see. I think, yes, this is Jagdishwaran. Okay. Let's see. Give me just one moment, guys. Jagdishwaran. I can't filter, but again, when we end the session, the attendance report shows who joined. So great, congratulations, Jagdishwaran. I'll connect you 101, and then we will send over your Apple AirPods. With this, great. Thank you very much, guys, for joining, and thank you, Karan and Abhishek. It was fantastic session. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
Vikas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.